Hello, everyone. Thank you again for subscribing to the Patreon. I appreciate it. As I sit here and I'm still kind of in between jobs, any support is definitely welcome. Although, I am mostly doing this for my own self-satisfaction for now. But anyways, we're going to be doing an article reading this week. So basically we'll be going back to my NieR Automata review, or I don't know if it's Automata or Automata, but I'll try my best to call it Automata this whole time because I think that's right. But it's my original NieR Automata review that came out in April 10th, 2017. I don't remember how long that was after the game came out. Basically, there's a few different reasons why I chose this article. This is not a random one. I chose it. One is that this is more timely, so it's not probably going to be very relevant by the time you hear this, but there's some kind of like underground marketing thing happening where there's like a additional area added to the game that somebody posted a video online and nobody could figure out how to get into the area. And then they kind of figured out some stuff, or rather somebody uploaded another video. It seems like a guerrilla marketing tactic from Square Enix to drive interest in another NieR. So maybe by now you already know there's a NieR game that's coming or something like that. I'm personally not like super excited about what they've shown of this because it is just kind of like Easter eggy kind of stuff otherwise. But if they show a new NieR video game and it's like cool and I'm interested, cool, excited, awesome. Just until that point, I'm just kind of like, okay, cool. Thanks for doing that. So there's that. Second part is that I did that NieR voice acting comparison video last year between English and the father NieR and the son NieR, and I kind of felt like I had to follow that video up in some way, and so naturally I was like, okay, I got to do a NieR Automata video or something like that. And then I just realized, like, what would I talk about with NieR Automata? I would talk about, basically say what my review said. This is my impression. I mean, I don't remember if I read the review at the time. I think I may have, or just to kind of refresh my memory. But like, I would have basically said what I said in this review. If you don't know, I'm not a fan of NieR Automata, or at least in 2017 when I wrote this article, I was not. I have a pretty strong opinion on this game for a lot of reasons. I don't necessarily think those opinions are accurate today. It's been 5 years, had a lot of time to think about this video game. So it feels a little weird to kind of go back and like, even if I were to like come to terms with some of the stuff, just making a whole video about that, like, I think I still at the end would come away with, I don't like this game still. Like, I don't think I have changed my opinion on how this game is yet. But anyway, so I wanted to do some kind of follow-up video and I just couldn't really figure it out. And I think I have an idea of what I want to do now, but for now, I will set that aside. So what I thought would be a good idea after I did my Xenoblade Chronicles videos, like maybe it's actually a good thing. This would be a good time to go back and read this whole article and revisit my feelings on this game and kind of address them. Because, I don't necessarily think I'm right in my NieR feelings. I think there are a lot of things that are, flexible depending on what type of fan you are of the series, what your expectations were. I wrote a whole article before this actually, talking about how I was looking at the press cycle for this game. And I was like, this game does not look like it understands what makes the original NieR so great. And so I was like, this game looks like it might not be what a NieR fan would want. And then there's just kind of this realization that I had when this game came out of just like, oh, what I want out of NieR is not what anyone else wants out of NieR. Like, I was talking to my friends about it, and they're like, oh, NieR's a bad game with a good story. And I'm like, hold up. The original NieR is like one of my favorite video games, not for us, like, the story is good, don't get me wrong, and I love the story, I love the characters, there's a lot of great things, and I'm sure that's going to get touched on in the article here. But the gameplay was really what sold me on NieR in a lot of ways, and I'm sure I'll talk about that a little bit in this article. I did note here that, like, hey, I've got spoilers for NieR Automata, so yeah. But so that's kind of why I kind of had a disconnect, I feel like. So I just want to kind of go back, review this, and then talk about like what my updated feelings are, because I've talked about this a lot on stream and on the podcast over the time, but maybe do something a little more formal where I'm directly looking at my opinion from 2017 and kind of, decide what's good and what's bad. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this is a very long article, and I did do a little bit of reading ahead, and a lot of this is very video game review kind of text. I think this came out a ways after the game came out, but I'm a little more flexible these days. But back then I was a lot like, if I talk about a game, I have to do a full review. I still am kind of that way, but I find more, I have a reason to do so because I'm talking about obscure games and things like that. And like somebody needs to know how Nintendoji works, right? NieR, this game, people knew. Like, this is after the game was reviewed and everything. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick little read here real quick. I'm actually going to drink water real quick before we get started. But I'll cut that out, obviously. But yeah, so this article is called NieR Automata, Not Quite Near or Far Enough. I was doing a little clever title at this time. I don't do that anymore because YouTube does not like that. And I think the other article I wrote that was like talking about me not getting like what I was wanted out of the press cycle was like I think a fear of NieR, I think is what it's called. So anyways, and again, this is from April 10th, 2017 is when I wrote this. So, 5 years ago at this point. All right. Sorry. I forget if I said it. I'm going to stop and talk about this article as we go through it rather than read the whole thing because it is really long. When I first played the original NieR more than half a decade ago, I don't think I could have ever foreseen how much it'd resonate with me, or that it would be one of the many titles essential in changing how I view games today. While flawed, the variety in level design, off-kilter writing, fantastic music, and its surprisingly vulgar yet compassionate cast made a huge impact on me. I hardly expected NieR to get a proper sequel, nor could I have imagined how disappointed the final result would be with NieR Automata. Still agreeable with that about the original NieR, by the way. Just a heads up, if for some reason you haven't played the two NieR games, this article contains significant spoilers for both games. I think most people will be surprised or baffled by my feelings. NieR Automata has the force of Platinum Games behind its development, and reviews have been overwhelmingly positive. It's being touted alongside a recent wave of mainstream successes from the Japanese industry. What's actually really fascinating about this time, like 2016-ish in general, was like Japanese games kind of were coming back in a way, and it's like really exciting, and like it's something easy to forget about these days, but like Japanese games were not positively viewed for a very long time, almost a decade. So it's great that we're finally back to that point. In some ways, NieR Automata shows promise in its opening scenes. The setting screen is worked into the story as a character helps walk the protagonist through her body's configuration process. Despite being sold as the third person action title, it opens with a top-down shooter segment. After smashing into a wall, the robot pod companion lists off a huge number of warnings and system notifications that all start to overlap each other in frequency as the main character casually bursts out the other side. None of the above are particularly unique, but it does set the tone in a way that seems appropriate given the director's history. If you still have any doubts this is a Yoko Taro game at the helm, or this is Yoko Taro at the helm, the robot orgy you stumble into that somehow births a human-like being will probably change your mind. It's the right kind of bizarre and weird that makes his tone quite distinguishable. Unlike the first game, which only presents a moral conundrum around the protagonist's actions upon a second playthrough, Automata is upfront with questioning the ultimate mission. The main character is 2B, a member of a team of androids created to retake Earth from an alien invasion so mankind can return from the living on the moon. Immediately upon reaching the Earth's surface, she finds robots have taken on human emotions and activities. Despite this, she continues to slaughter them as they beg for mercy and attempt to protect their families. Automata still has the same problem as the previous entry, as most enemies aggressively attack the protagonist while also screaming at her to stop, but video games. Ironically, the same way NieR Automata is about the robot's blind endeavor to imitate humans, this sequel feels like a well-intentioned yet unsuccessful attempt to recapture the main elements of the original. What contributions Automata does try to make fails to adopt a unique identity. The first NieR received a lot of praise for mixing bullet hell style shoot-'em-up mechanics into a third-person melee action game. Automata brings back, I wonder if it got a lot of praise. I think it, like, even though people were negative on the game, I think it did get praise for that. Automata brings back those Automata brings back those slow-moving and screen-filling projectile attacks. It doesn't particularly add or remove anything to improve this aspect. It's just kind of there again, with a slightly different skin as the player has more traditional bullets and missiles substituting magic. The lack of MP does encourage the use of these skills more than before. It's clear that the efforts were focused, that little bit there, the lack of MP does encourage the use of more of these skills for is like the most video game review term. Like, I have to say this somewhere, and I don't really think it's that important, but I had to shove it in because it is a change. It's clear the efforts were focused elsewhere, as the title's most defining feature is that it asks, what if NieR was also a shoot 'em up? Significant portions of NieR Automata play as a top-down and dual-stick variations of the genre, implementing different styles of on-rail shoot-'em-up segments into unrelated genres is something Platinum Games has done with quite a few other releases over the years. They're often a nice change of pace and a pleasant surprise if it's your first game by the developer. Although there are occasionally complete genre shifts in the previous NieR, they were often quick one-off side attractions. In the case of Automata, these sections are used far too often to simply be a novelty. They're a core part of the experience. I think when I'm thinking about that NieR one-off side attraction, I'm mostly thinking about the text adventure section of the game, because it's not really like a core mechanic. The problem that Automata runs into is that this aspect feels like the skeleton of any other implementation in the genre, with minor additions that aren't accounted for in the challenges presented. That's a weird word soup. There are 3 distinct styles of shooter segments in NieR Automata. Within 2, 3 seem to be an attempt to mirror the combat of the original by mixing in third-person action elements. Let's read further on that, but I really question that positioning of that. The top-down scrolling segments are the most vanilla. Despite having access to a few melee attacks, they don't feel integrated with the flow of combat. The movement feels too sluggish to efficiently get in close, and enemy placement largely seems in line with the expectations that you'll simply shoot foes. Often using the blade leads to unnecessary risks. The melee component feels more natural in the dual-stick shooter segments, where the playfield is treated as an arena. The player not only has a faster and more capable slash, but the enemies are also placed much closer. It can be pretty satisfying wiping out an entire squad of foes in 1 or 2 swipes. Both the above styles are ultimately held back by considerations in the level and enemy design for close range abilities. Lack of consideration in level designs and enemy designs for close range abilities. What is presented is incredibly limited. The lack of enemy formation variety make each wave predictable and repetitive. There are less than a handful of foes between both sections above, most of which are fodder and not intended to present a challenge. This is in comparison to the original entry's bullet hell influences that fundamentally change the typical attack pattern of the genre for some enemies and forces the player to rethink their approach when closing in. Here, at best, the sword swipes can be spammed to destroy all incoming fire. Otherwise, it doesn't ask for anything else. Looks like I'm moving on. Yeah, like that comment I said about like this kind of being equivalent to the NieR's original mixing. I think what I'm trying to say is that like it is the original NieR but flip-flopped, right? Where it's like, hey, NieR is an action game with shooter elements. So here's a shooter with action elements. I think that's like what I'm trying to say here. And ultimately it seems like I pretty much said it failed, which I would agree with. I don't think the shooter segments in that game are particularly fun, challenging, or interesting from my memory. So well, with the exception of one, and I'm pretty sure I talked about that in here because it blew me away when I got there. So anyways, moving on. This is in comparison to the original entry's bullet hell influences that fundamentally changed the typical attack patterns of the... Oh, I already read that, sorry. The third and final segment is hacking, which becomes a mainstay on the second playthrough. It largely plays as a simplified version of the dual-stick segments by stripping away all functions outside of firing and moving. They're at least more environmentally diverse, adding obstacles that can constrict movement or provide cover. It aesthetically differs from other shooting segments, though they also suffer from the lack of enemy diversity. How repetitive this gets largely depends on how hard the player leans into this mechanic during battles, as completing a successful hack will often result in an explosion that can damage multiple foes. You'll run into the same level designs dozens of times over, which eventually led me to ignoring the hacking outside of when it was vital to progression. The simplicity behind hacking would be much more appreciative if the two sections mentioned previously featured more depth. It's like if it differentiated more, I think. Since they don't, it comes off as more shooting with the pieces that were even potentially interesting removed. I need to think about that a little bit. It's unfortunate since it feels like an attempt was made here to make the three different implementations under a single genre. Ultimately, the foundation is not well realized enough to diversify them. I think that's the key point. They're not diversified enough. They have the depth of a novel minigame, but excessively stretched out across the main story. This disappointment extends into the rest of the title as well, as NieR Automata fails to build on subtle layers of variety that the original offers. I want to kind of return back to this just a little bit, and I think at this time, I probably appreciated the shooting segments with like melee combat more, because it seemed like it was probably trying to do something. I think ultimately, the hacking sections are the better part of the games, just because while the action parts of NieR have of that flying section with like the melee combat, where it sounds like I'm basically saying that like it doesn't really affect the game at all. You just kind of keep shooting and swiping and everything dies anyways. That just kind of comes off as nothing. So I just am like just thinking about what could have been, I think, in that situation. Where with this one down here with the hacking or whatever, I think the level design aspect of it, where the levels do change, even if they don't change that often, is largely the same. The fact that there is some kind of like level design aspect to it, I think I would weigh this part of the game a little heavier than I think I did back then, based off how I worded this stuff. All right, now we're getting into the actual NieR game that's not just top-down shooter. It's a very heavy top-down shooter beginning. The first NieR has a knack of using small challenges to the level design and camera positioning, The first NieR has a knack of using small changes to the level design and camera positioning that gives many segments a slightly unique bend to them. The Desert Temple restricts actions for solving puzzles. The Mechanical Ruins has a literal on-rail shooting segment as you ride a mine cart through a path filled with turrets and flying foes. The Haunted Mansion features narrow corridors and fixed camera angles like a survival horror game. Rather than simply acting as a different backdrop, each area presents a new experience, perspective, or challenge while still remaining within the confines of the core mechanics. It rarely revisits these, making them unique to their own areas. I don't know if that's really true, because I think the second time you come around, you do... No, they're different now that I think about it, because like when you go to like the mansion, you have the pre-configured angles, like hallway angles in the first time you go there, but the second time you kind of do a little bit, but you largely get like the top-down kind of gauntlet view. I think like the mines don't have the bomb puzzles anymore. You have to like do something else there. I think it does change it each visit, except for when you're doing the like game replays for the multiple endings, which the original NieR's problems with that is terrible. But I'm sure I touched on that here, honestly, about how this game improves that. Automata does retain some of these variations from the first release. Automata does retain some of the variations from the first release. If sporadic changes between 3D side-scrolling and top-down camera angles are the only part of NieR's gameplay that stands out to you, I think you'll be happy. Nevertheless, the lack of originality and near inexistence of any other elements outside of these camera angle changes significantly reduces their impact, making it feel like a hollow callback. The one exception, and probably the best 10 minutes of the whole experience, is a short behind-the-back mech segment. The tools used here are largely the same as the dual-stick shooter segment, but the on-rails and auto-scrolling limitations are removed. It allows the player to control their own momentum through this short sequence. It's the only time you have this level of freedom using this skill set, outside of a brief repurposing of it during a boss fight. Rather than simply being spoon-fed waves, the player can approach foes on their own. It's one of the it's one of the parts of Automata that lives up to the original. This is a section with hacking. There is a section with hacking into and possessing robots for some stiff platforming. This doesn't resonate with me as much, although I appreciate the effort. The other elements are a variety, are often shallow and largely automated. The battle when controlling a giant machine is little more than window dressing. You can just spam attack and never get hit. Firing a cannon into the mouth of a giant robot fish requires a few timed button presses, but it's as simple as waiting for an enemy's mouth to slowly open. There's no challenge, depth, or player influence. The only reason they feel present is to give a sense of scale. Look at this big thing. Whoa, it's really big, right? Wow, you're controlling it, except you're not really. The third person, I wonder if there's, because a lot of games actually do this, where like you get control of something that's like, clearly not you really controlling it, and it's just kind of massive in scale. I'm trying to think of games that like may have implemented that, and I felt similarly about. I'm sure I've played games that have done this. I'm guessing it was just a lot more apparent in NieR because I was just searching for variety in that game, because variety is a big part of the original NieR for me. The third-person action combat does feel significantly different from the previous, more grounded and precise implementation. Platinum Games' combo-driven style that focuses on evading and countering to initiate a flashy flurry of combos is in full force here. This system works best with small crowds of enemies. Automata frequently swarms the player with a dozen or more enemies at a time. It makes sense to unlock the camera for a single foe to perform crowd control, yet the game seems to have a hard time disconnecting from a player, or from a target. Oh, I think this is a very long section where I complain about a very specific thing. Likely in an attempt to keep foes within the reach to optimize combos, even undoing the lock-on feature will leave a softer automatic targeting system that prioritizes enemies. No matter which way you hold the analog stick, your attack will be directed at the foe that is invisibly determined as the prime target. I thought maybe this was a side effect of the combat possibly being designed to stay focused on enemies in front by simply dodging flanking foes. However, it causes other problems. There are fights where enemies have weaponry or pieces of armor that the player should single out and destroy. For some reason, the strikes magnetize to the center body of that foe. It's not that the game is locking onto the body instead of these other parts, but that they don't seem to be considered targets at all, despite being intended to be removed. To hit these pieces, they have to be between the main character and the center of the enemy. The armor will get caught in the crossfire of being unable to reach the main target. These targeting issues become especially apparent in a late boss fight. This is like 4 paragraphs of this. These targeting issues become especially apparent in a late boss fight where a number of tentacles surrounding the arena Let me try that over. These targeting issues become especially apparent in a late boss fight where there's a number of tentacles surrounding the arena with an enemy peeking up over the edge. Even standing right in its face, the character would turn around and swipe at the tentacle beside the boss instead. That's not to say this flaw makes the combat unplayable or that the overall gameplay doesn't feel satisfying. It works the majority of the time, and dodging a foe, knocking them into the air for a combo before slamming them back down feels fantastic. I'm actually surprised I said that. However, in the absence of any other standout features to define Automata's combat beyond the twist of the original NieR already implemented, this problem sticks out. I'm curious if that problem really stuck out. I have had a lot of these moments when I write reviews where like there is one particular thing I'm aware is a problem, but I think about it and I say, is this actually a problem? Like, is this a minor inconvenience? Does this actually affect the game in any real way? I would say this is a minor inconvenience. I think I say in here that it's a minor inconvenience, or at least it's not unplayable. But I think at this point I was just trying to pick at things to pick at with NieR, honestly, looking at this. I think whenever I have a section that goes this deep into one particular thing, there's a couple of exceptions for this, like Xenoblade Chronicle 2's profession check. I think that part of the game is horrific for a lot of reasons. But this is not that. And I'm surprised I spent so much time on this because it is very whatever. But I think that's something that if I were to do this today, I would say there are some control issues in combat and then leave it at that, basically, with lock-on mechanics or something like that. So it's a little clunky. Sum it up like that. Don't need an essay about how the lock-on targets something else instead. The thing I was surprised about with like the fantastic thing though is that I think my opinion on the combat for NieR and Platinum games in general has probably kind of gotten even worse since then. I look at Platinum games and I often just feel like I don't want to play that. Like, I think the problem I have with Platinum games usually is that, despite what I say here, I generally don't feel like their combat is satisfying. I feel like every hit in a Platinum game often feels way too weak and way too like there's no impact. So there are key moments in a combo in a Platinum game where when you hit an enemy, and I'm guessing this is maybe why I say it's satisfying to slam them back down, like where the enemy is moved that it feels good, I feel like. But most of the time, I always call it like a fireworks show of just like sparks are everywhere and like nothing is really happening, but the enemy's health bar is like slowly draining. It's not like a chunk out of the health. Like a lot of things just add up where I feel like I don't really care for that thing. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just not something for me. And I do feel like the NieR remake of the original NieR does a really good job of finding a healthy medium between the original NieR on PS3 and 360 and what Automata is. That's probably the best combat of any of these games, in my opinion, because it's a lot more impactful, but it still has the flashy, sparky feeling of Platinum games. And like, I don't get the impression most Platinum Games fans think this is like a particularly great playing game. I think it is acceptable for the most part. It fits the style. This does not feel like Platinum bringing their A game to combat, I think. I wonder if I'll touch it on here as well, because like, I have a lot of feelings about how Platinum Games feels like a good connection for a NieR game because of a lot of stuff we've talked about so far. We'll see if I make that connection. If not, I'll go in detail at the end, if I remember. Initially, I thought this different combat system might change the feel of the shooter elements added. While it still makes the player rethink their approach from other significant releases in the melee action genre, it doesn't change the implementation in any significant way from the last game. I was somewhat hopeful throughout the experience that Automata would turn around and start to feel more varied and interesting. That being said, I didn't expect too much since what Square Enix was showing during the press cycle was pretty bland. What I did expect were characters with the unmistakable Yoko Taro flavor. I guess that's my story transition. Seems kind of rough, but we got there. The first NieR and Halua fight down there is a great thing to have two paragraphs in, you have a video of the Halua fight already from the original NieR. The first NieR has a distinct and in some ways extreme cast. Every character is drastically different and forced into a specific personality type. Initially, it seems limiting and counterproductive to their development. Grimoire Weiss, we're going to talk about NieR, I guess now. Grimoire Weiss mostly spouts sarcastic and demeaning dialogue. Kaine is vulgar, nice, got a little accent on Kaine there. Kaine is vulgar as well as blunt. Kaine is vulgar as well as blunt, and Emile is shy and emotional. Despite their eccentricities, they somehow feel human. At the center of the main cast is NieR, who reflects back at everyone. He shows a fatherly/brotherly, I guess I was not aware of the differences because I feel like this is not actually the case for Brother NieR. He shows a fatherly. We'll stick with fatherly because if you watch my NieR video, you know that that's what I feel, is that the brother does not do well with interacting with the rest of the team. He shows a fatherly compassion towards Emile, exchanges profanities with Kaine, and banters with Weiss. Mixing all four of them together as they bounce the conversations around the party somehow forms a perfect mix of crudeness and benevolence in their relationship. Thank you, Holypuff for that video, apparently. I think the sets of events that best encompass this in the original is how each individual reacts to Emile's transformation. Here's the spoilers part. Despite Emile mutating into a monster, NieR simply walks over, embraces Emile's new skeleton body, and welcomes him back. As the initial scene is ending, Emile cracks a joke, and Weiss isn't afraid to tell him how his transformation hasn't changed his awful sense of humor. The next major scene has Kaine reuniting with the party after 5 years. She immediately recognizes Emile in his twisted form and thanks him for saving her. Then she looks at NieR, who has been worn and damaged over the years, and says, "You look like shit," While Yoko Taro's previous title, we just moved on from that without saying anything else. While Yoko Taro's previous title, Drakengard 3, isn't particularly a great game, it still exceeded my expectations when it comes to the Yoko Taro's characters, writing, and dialogue. So I was kind of shocked that Automata failed to meet my expectations in this aspect. Automata relationships are much more traditional. 2B is a central figure of the plot, but despite everyone's love for her curvy body, her personality is as flat as a board. She's a straight and strict combat android who, once in a blue moon, brushes with the idea of having feelings with her companion 9S. Her role is almost entirely based on this. Still, she rarely shows it in any significant way to make an impact. At best, their interactions throughout the story are bits of flirtatious dialogue. It's cute, yet never goes anywhere. When the time does come where it's supposed to be a heart-wrenching scene at the finale of the first arc, so little has happened between them that it feels devoid of any weight. It is only when 2B's presence is removed in the final path that other characters can develop. 9S's descent into insanity shows more about his feelings to 2B than anything that happened when she was alive. By the time I started getting to know and love 9S, I forgot I did really like 9S. And to some extent A2, the game is over. It's a fantastic final 2 hours that puts everything before it to shame. Unfortunately, it took 18 hours of apathy towards anything else happening to get there. I've talked to a few people about 2B and generally received the response of, well, she's a combat android. Of course, she's almost a blank slate. But when she's the one interacting with most other characters, it makes each conversation feel one-sided. Her being a robot android is a weak justification since there are plenty of other androids and robots that do give off a strong sense of personality in their limited screen time. For combat models specifically, there's a data log about an expedition gone wrong that goes out of its way to give military androids identity. If you like that she's intentionally a brick wall that rarely shows her cracks, sure, I can't doubt your opinion. Nevertheless, her being an android alone doesn't justify her poor performance in the main role of the story. If anything, the pod companions do a much better job of showing transition from a calculated and analytical mindset to one of compassion for the main character. I'm not saying NieR Automata. Okay, before we get into that, I just want to talk about the characters a little bit with 2B. So I do say this is true. When I was first talking about this game, the big key aspect that people talked to me about was 2B's a combat android. She doesn't have personality. And you look at all the other androids in the game and they have personalities. There are some smaller characters that have personality. And it just kind of always just rubbed off of me, just being like, she's nothing, right? And I think there's legit reasons for a character to be like cold or not have emotion, things like that. Actually pulling that off in a way that is successful, especially in the long term, I think is very difficult. You know, Castlevania tried to do this with Shinoa to some degree. Rodea the Sky Soldier at the beginning of that game. I think the nice about Rodea the Sky Soldier, though, is that it plays off of it in a very humorous way, in a very fun way. So there's that aspect. However, what I mostly read after this, and this is one of those things where you start getting into, let's read the Wikipedia articles about NieR, and people basically say they're the slight things she does to show compassion and emotion for 9S, which is a very true thing. You know, you do very much have kind of, it's almost like a fatherly figure in some ways, where you have the stout, cold father that occasionally shows something little that gives you that compassion. And it's very clear by the end, like when 2B is killed by, I think, A2, like she feels for 9S. That is clear. That the connection was made inside of her. That connection was made. I think there's other stuff as well, like at the end of the first arc or whatever. But I think the problem is that it just does not show very well in the story. And unless you really dig deep, you don't see that. Now, if any fans are going to dig deep, it's the Xeno fans and the NieR fans. Those are, like, in my experience, Xeno, NieR, and Kingdom Hearts fans, you are the three that will dig as far as you can dig. And, people have done a lot of writing about this. I've read a lot of articles about this. I've read a lot of wiki posts. There's this whole, like, okay, how are androids numbered? What does that define them as? 2B, and there's 2 what is it, 2E or something like that in the later parts of the game. And then what does 2E mean versus 2B? It's a lot. It is a lot. And I think the ultimate decision I usually come to this is, if I need to read a wiki to understand your video game and what happened, that's great for the people who love doing that. And I think that's a valid way to tell a story, right? It's not what I like, but it's a valid way to tell a story. People like to immerse themselves in a game like NieR. And I think this is not something I really understood at the time. I could be wrong. We'll see if later on this, people love to immerse themselves in a game like NieR, and the story and the lore. And NieR becomes almost like a huge part of their identity, right? And there are parts of communities who discuss and talk and find every little piece of evidence to put pieces together. And, in a lot of ways, that's so much more valuable than just 2B and 9S being like, oh, we love each other, right? But to me, I think you can still give that. I think is the big thing. And I may be talking a little bit ahead here, but since we're on the topic of characters, I think the thing that really got away from me here is and I think I did not make a really good connection here, but what I'm saying at the top here with the previous cast is they are also kind of equally shallow in their personality, in how they interact with each other. But the connections they make and what they show throughout and the changes they make is a lot more in front of the player in a way that's satisfying. And you can dig deeper further in that game and get more out of it. You can learn more about these characters. You don't have to dig nearly as hard. And for me as a player, I appreciate the dirt that you put on top of something so players have to dig, but I want to be able to at least see what's on the top first, or else I'm not going to dig. I just don't have any interest in something that I have to tear my way through to get there. So this is just one of those things that over time, it's just, you got to accept it's one of your differences of opinion on this thing, or at least I have to accept that. You can feel whatever you want. You think I'm a fucking dumbass, but that is just my feeling about it. And I think feelings similar to how I feel about Xeno games and things like that. That is my thing. I don't think this. Okay, here we go, right here. I'm not trying to say that NieR Automata is hot garbage, but it's incredibly disappointing. The one note would be here for me. What I would probably put here right now is, to me, there are some things it does better. The pacing is significantly improved and feels more conductive. I guess we haven't really said anything positive about NieR Automata so far, thinking about it, in terms of actual text. It's all been very video game review language, and then adding little ticks against it as we go through. The pacing is significantly improved and feels more conducive to Yoko Taro's multiple ending formats, which layers on vital points with each main ending. I hate that part of the original NieR. I cannot stand replaying that game so many times. I would love to play that game again for reasons of maybe a future video, but the replaying of that game for the 9th time is the biggest reason that I'm kind of hesitating. As much as I love the first title, here we go. I should just read the article rather than just talk about my feelings. As much as I love the first title, playing through the back half of the story 3 to 5 times to get to the full tale was far from ideal. Automata lets you easily jump around and quickly achieve goals without meaningless repetition in between. Let me scroll down a little bit. I just want to. Okay, this is the end. Okay, one thing that I do not address here is that, like I said earlier, the last 2 hours of this game are great, and I think it pays off on the story at the very end, despite me having to go through 18 hours of apathy. NieR gets it done in one playthrough. If you play through NieR to get to ending A, you miss stuff, yeah, but you got a good story. You got a dad story that was really good start to finish, and if you only ever play that game through ending A, I think you get 80% of the way you need to be there. Last 20%, you're missing out, but 80% of the way, you get there. That's a big thing for me. Again, I should just read this before I start commenting more. We're almost at the end. We'll try to make it through without me jumping in anymore. As much as I loved playing the first title, playing through the back half of the story 3 to 5 times to get the full tale was far from ideal. Automata lets you easily jump around and quickly achieve goals without much meaningless repetition in between. The robots, while very similar to the humanized shades in the previous game, play a much bigger role. Having a more direct interaction with the main character gives them many of their own personalities and quirks. They are largely homogeneous in design, but those who distinguish themselves with crude makeup and clothing come off as quite charming. I wouldn't say the story is even bad. It's just the personalities and relationships are incredibly straightforward for Yoko Taro until it's the final moments. As I said earlier, this is more of my perspective rather than necessarily what people feel about it as a whole, or what I feel other people have digged up since then. Automata is undeniably a platinum game in its combat design, for better or for worse. From that perspective, it is an exciting step toward the action-adventure genre for the developer. I'm not particularly convinced the third-person action is necessarily better, rather than simply a different style from a previous entry. I will say Platinum's combat fits well. I don't know what I was trying to say in that sentence. Exactly what I expect from a sequel is a fine line. In no way did I want Automata to simply copy the first NieR. Still, I do think either the spirit needs to be intact, or it has to achieve something on its own. What Automata does bring from its predecessor never surpasses, or in some cases doesn't show it even understands the standard and precedent set in the original. We'll get into that. Where the game tries to pave its own path, it's unsuccessful in laying the foundation needed to distinguish itself. NieR Automata ultimately fails at both being a sequel or a reinvention of the franchise. Okay, we got some dirty laundry to clean up here at the end here. I know I talked a lot throughout this, so yeah. So first, let me roll back a little bit. We're talking about Platinum Games a little bit. And I think that I mentioned this in the article that I talk about pre-release, and maybe I shouldn't talk about this because we may eventually someday read that. But, I think Platinum Games is one of those developers that you look at NieR, what the original NieR was, and like, oh, yeah. Platinum Games would be a great fit. They have, great combat for, improving what the original NieR had done wrong. Again, I think the original NieR's combat, while not amazing, is fine for what it is. It feels like a Zelda game to me. A little stickier maybe, but not anything that bad. And I don't think Automata improves it in a way that I particularly find that much more interesting. Again, I think the mix between the original game and Automata in the remake of the original game, so many words about games, ultimately finds a happy place. And I really hope, going forward, I want them to improve and build on it. But if they're going to stick with, one of these play styles, I would prefer them to do that. But the bigger thing is, like, when you think about Platinum Games, they are a developer about variety in their game. And, I haven't played all their games, but when I think about, Bayonetta, when I think about Wonderful 101, things those games do, they add a ton of mini games that are based often on other things with Punch-Out, Space Harrier, things like that. These are experiences throughout the game. I think there's stuff in Bayonetta 3 that they showed in the trailer as well. So they are good at taking an idea from another game and moving that over to their game and making it make sense in the context of the events on screen and making it play fine enough to get you going through. I think that works really well for like a 5-minute chunk or less. I think the problem is that this game went too hard on being a shooter. The shooter elements should have been significantly less, which I talked about here. But the bigger thing is that this game does not mix those elements with the game design very well, like the core game design. And I don't think I've ever seen a Platinum game do that. Platinum games have hard cuts between their variety. And while the original NieR has those things where there's like, the text adventure sections, things like that, the majority of the game is built upon the core mechanics and adjusting those core mechanics to change the dungeons and stuff like that. And change how you interact with those dungeons. And then so the kind of surface level things is the camera changing for, side scrolling to 3D. I think the Gauntlet stuff you have a little more of a place there, and the survival horror stuff has a little more of a impact to it. But, the side scrolling in 3D sections, or side scrolling and top down sections to some degree, kind of return. But like it's just kind of in some ways feel like it's repeating a lot of the notes, which I said in the thing. So really what I'm just trying to say is that Platinum Games, I think on paper I can see why somebody said Platinum Games would be a great fit, but I think in reality, when I think about what I like about NieR, it does not fit at all. However, here's my next point here to talk about before we wrap things up. I'm pretty sure that my enjoyment of NieR is different from other people's enjoyment of NieR, I think. I mentioned this at the start, but like, I had conversations with my friends. I had a group of friends that really love NieR. All love Papa NieR. He's a good boy. But when Platinum Games got announced for NieR, I just kind of was like, okay, that's fine. they were ecstatic. Which, if you're a fan of Platinum games, sure. But the reason they were ecstatic was that they're like, oh, NieR can finally be a good video game. And it can have a good story too. And I was just like, wait. Thought we were on the same page about NieR being a good video game. And then everyone was like, oh no, the combat was bad, the level design was bad, the world design was bad. I'm like, what? And there are legitimate complaints about that world design and like structure and stuff, and like definitely like, hey, you gotta go and walk across that world so many goddamn times over the overworld, and it's crazy. I think it's more of a pacing thing, an objective thing, and the game makes fun of itself for doing that for whatever reason. And it's just one of those things that it's just like, all right. Like that sucks, but like the stage design and things like that, the dungeon design, how the your character it changes throughout that, and like how you use the game's mechanics to interact the world with different ways depending on those changes in mechanics. I think were really good and special in that game, and I just didn't really get that from them. Like what they were telling me were like, oh yeah, there's the camera stuff. The camera stuff's like a cool gimmick, but it's not like a core part of what makes that game good. So I think there's that disconnect. I think the other thing that we did not maybe have the disconnect on were like characters. Again, they said the story was good. But I think the difference is that my willingness to dig into something like Automata versus that. But ultimately, what I wanted out of the NieR was not for them to do the things they did already. What I wanted was to try something new. And they do try something new, right? They just do it in a bad way, in my opinion, like with the Platinum games and stuff like that. Like, I think they need to take the ideas they had from that original game and reapply them in a different way. I think that's a very legitimate way to develop like a sequel to a game. I think of games like, Mario Galaxy. Great example of a game, like maybe the best example of a game that takes the fact that like Mario's Mario. He's gonna jump, man. But what if gravity? what if weird gravity? And it like creates this really interesting game design change that like you do not change necessarily what Mario's doing. His moveset's different, but you're not necessarily changing Mario's thing. But you change the environment he's in, the world he's in, and each of those worlds have different impacts on how Mario, jumps around the world and moves, and how jumping around the world changes. Like, ones you're going to orbit it, other ones you're just going to do a long jump. Like how long you jump depends on the curvature of the planet. It's some amazing stuff with that game. So like I think there's room for you to stick with the core idea, and then like innovate within that space and keep the game still the same while making a new feeling and a new experience. And I feel like this game just kind of, again, goes to the Platinum Games thing. And then also, I feel like I'm talking in circles here a little bit. Sorry if I am. And also the bigger thing I think is what it does pull from the original NieR as a sequel. It just kind of takes full pieces. So it kind of feels like a game that, like, Platinum Games was making a video game, looked at NieR, pulled the things from NieR that they wanted out of it, and just threw it on top of the video game that they had. Like, I'm not saying that's exactly how that worked. It obviously didn't work that way. But that's like, to me, it feels like a Platinum game, like a Platinum NieR spinoff in some ways, honestly. I'm not saying that's legitimate. Kavya is not the sole true developer of NieR, but that's kind of what it felt like. I think Toy Logic did the port for the latest version of the game, but that's just like that. Yeah. Anyways, so it didn't line up there. So I think really the values I had for this game and what I expected out of the sequel just did not line up with what Yoko Taro did. And I think honestly, Mario Galaxy and stuff like that is an exception, right? I think other games usually iterate on certain ideas, and I feel like NieR largely does that. Again, it tries to add stuff. Don't get me wrong. It's not that it doesn't try. It just tries to add stuff in a Platinum Games way, not in a NieR way, in my opinion. And so I think that is really where that disconnect happened, where I was just like, I don't care about most of the stuff happening in this video game from a mechanical perspective kind of thing. Story perspective, I already kind of went into that. So I feel like I haven't really said like what I wanted to say out of this, to be honest, and maybe that's just the ongoing difficulty I have with this game. I will say I do not believe that NieR is a failed sequel anymore. This last line here, NieR Automata ultimately fails at being a sequel and a reinvention of the franchise. It fails at being a sequel for me. And it's honestly just kind of lines up with what I said. It fails at being a sequel to me. Does not iterate on the ideas that I think, like, the values of this game. And the ideas it tries to reinvent itself with just did not resonate with me. So to me, this is a true statement. But I think this is maybe a very harsh way to put that kind of thing. So, but I do want to iterate that I do not think NieR is a bad game. I don't know if I said that in here at any point, but I do not think NieR is a bad game. NieR Automata is a bad game. I do not necessarily think the direction NieR Automata is bad. Obviously, this game did so well. But yeah, I think NieR Automata ultimately is a game that, for the right, two things. One, if you didn't play the original NieR, all this stuff probably is out the window, right? Like, this is a review from a NieR fan. But on the other side of it, like, and because it has some of those values from the original NieR, that's like fresh, right? Some of that is fresh. You get like the stuff that takes forever to get to in NieR Automata that eventually pays off in a way that feels very NieR-like. So you get the eventual payoff on that. Like, it does eventually happen. You do eventually get the NieR ending, right? The NieR ending I wanted, at least. And so, like, it feels very satisfying by the end of it. But yeah, I think if I wanted to be really critical of one thing about this game still, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, is just that I think the idea that you continue to have to tell people, keep playing this game, it gets better, keep playing this game, is a problem. That's not necessarily mean this game is not worth playing. If you know me, you know I'm excessively committed to video games most of the time. Like, I am miserable and we're at hour 60, but we're still gonna push through just in case the last 2 hours turns out great. but you know, I don't think that's necessarily, like, when you say that, I think that it does show a problem with the game's design in some way. And what I think the original NieR has that problem. It does not have it to the degree that I think NieR Automata does. Because the original NieR has the problem of it feels like a generic action game. But by the time you're at ending A, NieR has delivered everything you wanted it to. When I got to ending A in this game, I was like, that is the end of this video game? I do not feel like I got anything out of this, really. So, I feel like I'm still just like not... I think I'm just sitting here talking because I just still don't feel good about my feelings on this game. I think there's just times that I just feel... I feel like I'm too harsh on this game still. But, like, I know I believe in what I'm saying here, is the thing. I will not give you problems for liking NieR Automata, though. But I think this is probably why I did not want to make that NieR Automata video. Is because ultimately I know at the end of all this, I'm gonna feel very similar to this. Like this is NieR is a very personal game for me and how I liked it, and it's a game that fits a lot of my values. And this game ultimately did not deliver on the majority of those values. And at the end of the day, you know, I will continue to understand and try to, you know, I think at this point I do understand why the people like this game. But I don't think it's ever going to get to the point that, like, this game fits something that I will ever like again. Yeah, so I know this is going on long, so I'll try to wrap it up here. The one thing I can say about, like, a NieR follow-up game is, like, I do have a lot of hope. We only have, like, 2 NieR video games, right? So, you know, I do, like, cross my fingers, especially after people played the original NieR. I'm really hopeful that we get something that delivers on the things that I love about the original NieR. But, you know, with how well this game sold, I imagine they'll double down on this. That is what I will imagine. But, you know, if fans are happy, I think the big thing is that I have plenty of other franchises I can move on to. That's something I think over time I've really gotten a lot better at. It's just like, hey, Zelda doesn't need to be for me. I love Zelda. Loved Zelda. I'd say loved Zelda at this point. I loved Zelda, and I don't regret loving Zelda as long as I did, and I don't regret not loving it anymore. Just like Breath of the Wild, just to me was like, oh, it's time for me to go. I will probably still play Breath of the Wild 2 because I'm curious to see where it goes. It's only been one video game. It's just been a long time, right? That's kind of the nice thing about these franchises that take forever is that like I don't have to sit there and try to keep up with them. It's only been one video game, but NieR has only failed me once. And look, Monolith Soft, they failed in Xenosaga Episode 3, and they came back, baby. They came back. Admittedly, Xenosaga Episode 3 was a commercial failure too. but these games, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe those. Every creator probably knows the issues with some of their games. I guess the question would be: does Yoko Taro see these as problems? Do me and him, sympathize with each other in any way? And hopefully, for at least my sake, I hope we do. I hope we do get something that I can feel good about. The larger NieR fan base today can feel good about. That is my hope going forward. And again, if NieR whatever comes out next and, we don't get what I want, it's just probably time for me to leave that franchise. And that's fine again. I got plenty of other video games to play. I got to play Walk It Out for the Nintendo Wii. All right, I'm wrapping up. Again, thank you guys so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I appreciate it. Thank you for putting up with my feelings on NieR. I kind of was hoping we'd have a little bit more of a come to like Ben feeling better about this conversation moment, but I feel like I generally, I'm definitely more positive than when I wrote this, but I feel like I'm kind of still stuck at like where I was at 2-3 years ago. So I don't know, maybe we'll revisit this article again. Maybe I'll do a commentary on this video and be like, hey man, what's Ben doing? Remember that awful article reading series you did? All right, I'm gonna go. Thank you guys for joining the Patreon. I appreciate it, and I hope you guys have a great week. Bye.